Welcome to 30 Seconds to Insight with George and Adam.
Hiya, it's George here. Welcome back to 30 Seconds to Insight. I'm here with Adam, who you can see on the screen there. Adam, give us a quick wave.
Hello.
Actually, whilst I've got you here, Adam, I should say that some of the feedback from the previous podcast is it looks like Adam's in a prison. Is he okay? So just for the record, you're not in a prison, are you?
I am not.
Good. And you are fed and watered and you've got access to any medication you need, correct?
All taken.
Excellent. All right, on with the show. I thought we'd get straight into message testing, Adam, mainly because you and I ran a workshop last week with some business owners, which was fantastic. We got lots of insights working with those, talking through the process. And it seems to be, and certainly what came out of that workshop was message testing appears to be a hot topic at the moment. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's mostly because, there's more pressure to justify spend than ever before. And, message testing can seem like an additional cost from some perspectives, or it can be a way of de-risking quite a large spend. So as we'll get into, I'm sure if you're investing heavily in a rebrand, you're redoing your whole packaging, say, doing a bit of testing up front to make sure the packaging resonates, that it's on brand, and that the final result, actually is communicating what you want it to. A lot of people are starting to realize, well, that's money well spent, because the research investment is much smaller than all of the other development work.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of the feedback from that workshop, or certainly their expectation was, is this going to be quite an onerous process? Is it just showing somebody some messages and saying, right, which one do you like? Pick one. But actually, there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there? Especially from a research point of view and some of the sort of science behind it.
Yeah, messaging, it can be really what you make of it. I think I wouldn't want to put people off saying, oh, it's this onerous process where you have to first do qual work, then you have to look at emotional sentiment, then you have to look at, cognitive elements. What I would rather, you can just ask people if they like a message or not. However, that isn't all message testing is or can be. It can be a lot more. So it can be, quite involved, quite a layered process, or it can be really simple. And I would say you can, depending on your needs and where you're at as a business, you can kind of adapt to that.
Okay. So let's just quickly cover up, what are some of the common mistakes or pitfalls that people make when they're going about message testing, do you reckon?
Okay, so I think it depends on the project. But, a big one would be, and I don't want to say this is a bad thing to do because this is still better than doing nothing, but testing too late. So you do all that work, you spend all that money, you develop your creative, and at the very end you say, do you like it or not? Because it's almost like at that stage, it's, okay, you've already put a lot into this. There's a lot of internal buy-in. There's a lot of internal, emotion and all the other stakeholders have been engaged. Now, let's say the audience doesn't like it, puts you in quite a sticky situation. What you've been better off doing is getting a bit of, a more qualitative, a more detailed understanding of what the audience wants at the start, and then you probably are de-risking the need to test it at the end.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so if we had a magic wand and we was almost going to create the conditions for perfect message testing, then how do you think you should do it? What would you start with?
Yeah, great. So I would start with a really detailed understanding of the audience, and that could be across multiple segments. You might have, like, let's say you're a food and drinks brand. You're not going to be able to have multiple different targeted different packaging to different segments. So what instead you need to do is you need to come up with something that, works across segments. So you are going for like one message. However, if you're doing more ads or social, you can get a bit more targeted. So a good understanding of the audience would be a start. What do they like? What don't they like? What is clear to them? What motivates them? All of those layers, right? So when it comes to delivering a creative brief, you arm the creative with the creative agency or internal team with as much information about the audience as you can. So that'd be the first step. If you've done that, you're 50% there. Now, the second stage would be once the creative has developed, getting that tested, putting it in front of an audience. and then being prepared to do multiple rounds. And if it's not right, make those changes. So it's both understanding the audience and then understanding their reaction and then retesting. It's that continuous iteration.
How many iterations do you think? I mean, I'm just wondering if the folks listening are thinking, "Oh my goodness me, do we just go through this cycle over and over again?" I guess, when do we know when to stop?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult point. And the more you do, the greater your understanding will be. I think when you reach the point of like what a term we would use in the qualitative or interviewing domain is saturation, when the testing isn't revealing new insights. That's a great place to stop. Now, something we've been getting at is, this can seem really complicated. This can seem like a whole research program. But the big thing I would say is that when do we know when to stop? It's like, well, if you've only got budget to do a small test at the beginning, do that and then, use that. But I would rather put the investment in the research at the beginning so it can fund the development of the project. But if
Yeah.
you've got, budget for two tests is going to be great. Do one at the start, do one at the end. And so there's no right answer really, because it's like,
Okay.
can you understand your audience too much? I would say probably not.
Okay. So in that research, I mean, what format of research are we talking here? Are we talking survey? Are we talking interviews? Or how would you approach that? What would you choose?
I think it would depend on the message you're testing and how well you understand the audience. So if you have really well-defined segments and a simple product, I would probably start with open text surveys, gathering feedback. This is because that will be the most cost-effective way to still get you to some qualitative feedback. Certainly when it comes to message testing or testing designs, if you've got the option of getting those into a survey format and with really crisp, clear images and letting people view them and feedback on their own time, I think that's a fantastic way to go. Now, if you don't have an understanding of the audience, who they are, what they want, how these messages are going to land, the best way is probably going to be an interview format where you take them, one by one through different messages, different stimulus, and you really probe and understand their reaction. So that's going to give you a much more detailed understanding. But if you don't need that, I'd be going open text survey.
Okay. And so we're talking there about qualitative interviews and maybe a qual survey. How or where does copy treatment or A/B testing fit into this? Is it a replacement for or an accompany to? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, sure. So the kind of A/B test is the multiple choice, like pick your favorite, pick this, which one is best. Now, to do that, you're going to need to have the messages already developed. You're going to have them ready. So that's going to come right at the end when you've got your best quality messages. You absolutely put your best foot forward or feet forward with the messages and then get customers to pick. Now, this can be quite a strong thing to do at the end, especially if you've got some internal division or there's a bit of pull between teams. One person prefers one message, one team prefers another angle. And so that's where the kind of A/B or ABCD testing comes in. It's just a multi-choice format. And it can give you really clear data as well. That's what's so good about that stage is, 66% of people prefer this from one segment, 70% prefer this from another segment. That's really easy to feed back, and that gives you those types of insights you need at that more stakeholder level.
So do you think, and I don't think this is it's not a mandatory, but it sounds like what you're describing there in an ideal world, again, if we had a magic wand, it'd be great if you did some qualitative research before you got to the A/B testing, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with all message testing there's two elements. There's developing the messages, and that's where the qual comes in. And then there's testing the messages once they're developed. And so you first need to understand, explore, probe, and that's a very qualitative thing. But then when it comes to testing, pick one, propensity, willingness, they're all quantitative dimensions.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So I'm just thinking
just finally to add on that, because I didn't cover it. Yeah, the A/B testing would probably be the final and arguably the most important step at the end, where you're testing with real consumers. So you've done all this pre-work, but now it's time to launch and see how the messages actually drive sign up, drive resubscription, whatever it might be. And so that A/B test can come at the end on real consumers. And that's why it's so
Excellent.
important to get it right.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that it sounds to me like, I mean, you wouldn't ordinarily arrive at an A/B testing program without having done quite a lot of work before that in order to generate what goes in copy A, B, C, D, E, or whatever.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just guesswork, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's assume that, or let's think about people listening, and they have got a campaign coming up, and they're thinking, how might I use message testing just before I press go on spending a whole bunch of money and time pushing a campaign out? Where would be their first step, do you think?
Okay, so this is like a few simple areas you would look at. How
Mm,
clear is the message? Do they understand exactly what you're saying? You might do. However, does the audience perceive that clearly? And I think luckily a lot of our clients are great at this, but it takes a lot of humility to think, okay, I get this. This is crystal clear to me, but what about the audience? What about the other
yeah,
people? It's
yeah,
hard to have that kind of empathy with the customer. Trust, does the message promote trust? Does it look on brand? What's the emotional tone here? And what we're trying to achieve with this, is this message to raise brand awareness? Is this message to drive resubscription? Is this a straight call to action? What are we doing here? So if you think in those terms, clarity, emotion, and what is motivating, I think that's a good place to start.
I think that's really good, because one of the things that I am acutely aware of, and again, it came out in the workshop, is a lot of how we're reacting to messages, especially if people have created them themselves. To try and assess them objectively is really difficult. So you do need to break them down into their constituent parts to work out, okay, rather than saying I hate it, I love it, there are bits where some messages are stronger than others.
Yeah, completely. And it's if you develop it, of course, it comes from your perspective, so it will be crystal clear
Yeah,
to you. Taking that
yeah.
outside step is really difficult.
And the other thing that I just wanted to bolt on, and it's more an observation, having done this type of work quite a lot with your good self, is it is amazing how you assume a certain message is going to land in a way that when it gets tested, it is completely and utterly different. It's a bit like the old saying, which is it's not what you're saying to them, it's what they're hearing.
Mm.
And the testing, I think, for me, is the bit that helps you get through that. But you're right, having some humility to accept that actually the one you thought was great is in fact just not getting through in the way you thought it would.
Yeah, definitely. I think once you've seen that happen, and for instance, I've developed messages that I thought were, crystal clear, and they
Mm.
just tanked. No one got them. So once you've done that once, you don't need to do it twice.
Yeah, fair point. Okay, that is brilliant. There's a lot to message testing, isn't there? Because obviously, what we've kind of covered as well is a bit of insight into how to develop the messages that end up getting tested. But I think the point you're making is that you should really see this as very much a cyclical thing.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something we've been drawing on is there's the development work, crafting those messages, then
Mm,
there's the testing it, and then if you go back to the start, and relook at how those messages are perceived, well, you're back at the crafting stage again. So it's
yeah,
explore, test.
gotcha. What do you think? I'm just trying to think, how often would you do this? I mean, what are we talking? Months, years, quarters?
So I think obviously it depends on context. So if you're testing how your brand is perceived, how short messages, you probably don't need to retest those very often
Okay,
because
yeah.
if it's a really simple message that comes with the brand, let's say a tagline or something, that probably isn't going to change year on year. Once have a good base of how that's understood. If you're, going for something a bit more complicated, like let's say a rebrand, well, you're going to do a lot of work understanding the perception of that, and then if that changes, that will be kind of over a long-term basis. But then again, you can also do it on a very like a short-term basis. So let's say you're putting a lot of money into ads and messages. Well, there's never going every couple of months is going to be a really good time to check in with that. So I think it depends on the investment and how long you're spending kind of looking at those messages.
Gotcha. Okay. Right, that has been message testing. Thank you, Adam. I think that was really useful. We were going to put some resources in the comments and in the show notes also to pad out some of the things that we've talked about. And as I've said before, if there's anything that you want us to talk through, then please let us know. And until the next episode, I will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.